Good evening and welcome back to College Football on Tap, brought to you by On Tap Sportsnet. I am Chris White along with Bruno Oger. Bruno, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, Chris. Good to see you, pal. It's been a while since we've been on together, and it's good to be able to get back together right here when we finally had our first ever 12-man college football playoff poll release this week. I know we've kind of already talked a little bit about it, but how are you feeling?
Yeah, I like some stuff. I hate some stuff. You're never, going to get it exactly the way you want to, whether it's the rankings or the road the playoff will take. But we've got a few weeks left to see some things shake up. So altogether, I'm content.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're both Notre Dame fans, as a lot of people know. Whenever we've done the show together, and even Ross, who may or may not jump on with us today. He's got he got really busy with work today, so we're hoping to see Ross jump on at some point. But yeah, I mean, Notre Dame, obviously, like, we're coming into the week and you thought that Notre Dame was going to be ranked a little bit higher than where they ended up being, just because of what they were in terms of the AP poll the week before. Let me move over here. This light's kind of irritating. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how this first poll kind of came out and where it kind of ranked a bunch of these teams that are ranked lower in terms of what conferences they play in terms of where we could start off with the Army coming in at number 25. Obviously, they got a big game against Notre Dame coming up in a couple of weeks here, but they were the first team that kind of you saw get dropped down on the list on Tuesday, and they were much higher ranked. They were 23rd in the AP poll, and they dropped down despite being undefeated. So you kind of see where they're kind of going to be trading off here already from the get-go with the college football playoff in terms of where they play, who they play, when they play them. And I think that was kind of the first thing that I saw when I was watching them run through the list was them instantly ranking an undefeated team who hasn't had the best of schedules, obviously, a little bit lower.
Yeah, I mean, on top of, strength of schedule and home wins, quality wins, I think the school name is going to carry quite a bit of weight when we're entering this as well. You're going to see, obviously not your top 10 teams, but teams like Ohio State and Michigan, Bama, Georgia, those big school names are always going to be able to get a little bit more tolerance and find their names a little lower on the list.
Yeah, so we'll kick it down with a lot of teams that came in lower in terms of the list right now. Obviously, a couple of them have chances to move up depending on what kind of chaos we see over the course of the last 4 weeks of the regular season. But like we said, Army 8-0 coming in at 25. Missouri, a 6-2 team. Obviously, they've been struggling a lot more than what we originally thought we were seeing from them at the beginning of the season, but the offense is definitely taking a slow down here, coming in at 24. Clemson coming off of a big loss last week to Louisville, dropping down to 23, which puts Louisville ahead of them now at 22. So Louisville probably wouldn't have even been in the rankings if they would have lost, but now they're a 6-3 team coming in at 22. So you're already seeing the first 6-3 team that's on the list, and the only 6-3 team actually that's on the list, and Louisville being 22, being from the ACC conference. So I think that's something to keep an eye on.
So you got Louisville with 3 losses, and you don't have another team undefeated from 24 all the way to 9 when you get to BYU. So Army is kind of getting screwed there a little bit. You talk about going from 23 to 25. Obviously, they play in the American, not Power, but it's quite a bit of disrespect, I guess. Louisville's win against Clemson is the only thing carrying weight here.
Yeah, honestly, the way Louisville's been playing over since the way that they played against Notre Dame, I mean, they had a good game with Notre Dame, but since that game, they've kind of fallen off as like we've both paid attention to them a bit. Obviously, wanting the best for a lot of teams that Notre Dame did have to play this season, kind of hoping that gives them a little more juice in terms of the college football playoff and where they're ranked up at. But Louisville would have been a 5-4 team. Probably wouldn't have even seen them back in terms of the rankings, no matter how they finished the season, unless they got this win. So obviously, that gives me another idea that chaos is very capable of changing a lot of things here, which there's something I'll jump into later on when we get lower down into the bracket with some of these SEC schools and the competition that's still there. Washington State, and you have to kick my memory. Washington State doesn't have a real conference, right?
I believe they are one of 2 teams in the Pac-2.
Yeah, so a Pac-2 team at 7-1 coming in at.
Sources tell me they have a great chance they're going to win the Pac-2.
Yeah, I like their chances. So kind of the same vote as what Notre Dame is, a team that is a non-conference team. We'll just kind of say that. No disrespect to the Pac-2 as of right now. I know that they will be growing in the future here, but
I believe they're up to either 6 or 8 teams now. And
yeah, I know it's 6. I can't remember if 2 more came in. But yeah, Washington State, surprisingly, on this list. I actually do want to look really quick just to see what they have left on their schedule. They do have Oregon State from the Pac-2, so that'll be a big highlighted game on the CW network as the Pac-2 championship is decided. But they got Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, and Wyoming left, so not the toughest roads ahead for them. I know Wyoming's having a down year when they're normally a pretty tough team, so that might have been a tougher game on the schedule than what it looks like it will be now. But interesting enough just to see them in the conversation. And it could be very interesting to see, does that team, if they're undefeated the rest of the way, get in above an undefeated Army team the rest of the way if Boise State ends up faltering?
I mean, you have to – obviously we're letting at least one team in out of the non-powers. I think Boise State's okay with a loss in hand. I think they still get the nod over Army there.
Mm-hmm.
And Notre Dame, who's not getting a whole ton of respect, is they handled Navy with ease. So I don't see any world where Army can where Army can get the same results.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the game against Notre Dame is going to mean a lot, and the polls will actually already be out by the time that the Army-Navy game actually happens. They will already decide who is in the college football playoff by that point. So back-to-back Army-Navy games, or however that can still shape out in the American Conference.
Likely.
Yeah.
Unless Eastern Carolina pulls it together.
Yeah. So we'll kind of see how that kind of plays out, but I think it is interesting to see Washington State in there. A team that me and you both highlighted before we got on the mic here, Colorado coming in at 20. A very interesting team in Colorado. Nobody really knows what we really think of them yet. The Pac-12 is just kind of a cluster right now. I mean, not that it's a terrible cluster at all, but it's just Colorado has a shot at winning the conference, coming in at 4-1 right now. BYU is obviously 5-0. Iowa State got a big loss last week. Kansas State's 4-2. Colorado has to play a Texas Tech team that just got a big win this week. They were the ones who took down Iowa State, I believe, this week. So interesting team for Colorado. Obviously, a team that very much, if they win out, you would expect to see in the college football playoff.
That's a team I'm speaking on when I talk about schools carrying their own weight, just due to all the attention in the program. If they win out, and obviously some chaos needs to happen. If the opportunity is there, they will be in the playoff.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I would think that they're at as well. But right now, no one could stop that BYU Cougars team in the Big 12. So until somebody stops them. I'd say best of luck because I don't think Colorado gets in if they lose a Big 12 championship if they do win out the rest of the regular season. But obviously, there's still a window there for them. Next team up was Kansas State at number 19.
Kansas State interests me because all the talk preseason was we already know who's in the Big 12 championship. It's Kansas State, Oklahoma State. And then you've got Colorado right behind them. You've got Iowa State at 17. You've got BYU at 9. I mean, Iowa State, or I'm sorry, I said Iowa State already. So you have Big 12 presence here, no Oklahoma State at all, and Washington trailing two of those three teams Kansas State trailing two of those three teams I just named there. So we all knew what kind of happened there. It's as simple as falling apart, lingering injuries. The Big 12 is, I'm highlighting what you said there, it's not close. BYU is a real powerhouse.
Yeah, Kansas State and BYU played each other earlier on in the season, and for those of you who may not recall, it was a bloodbath. Like, this was kind of like where I started thinking, like, why are people not taking BYU on spreads more often? Why is Las Vegas constantly disrespecting the Mormons? Because they are covering, and they are covering by a lot. You're able to get them, plus 200 more, take a risk, like bubble them up, and they've been hitting like crazy. It's starting to come back down to earth a little bit here, I think, where Vegas is like, wow, okay, they're pretty good. But Kansas State got destroyed by this BYU team. And then last week, they lost to a Houston team that has not been good at all. Not a game that they could lose. Not a game that I enjoyed watching them lose because it was the only one on my parlay that ended up losing. So with that being said, Kansas State, I really just, even if they win out, I don't see it happening because they do have to play Iowa State yet at Iowa State. So I think that's going to be a very tough game for them. I don't see them having the best window of getting into a college football playoff with last week's loss. No matter what you kind of may think of the Big 12 at this point, but Colorado, who's ranked below them, I think would be a better team suited, depending on how many teams from the Big 12 may even get in.
Yeah. So next at 18 is 7-1 Pittsburgh, and they've been on kind of a freaky little tear lately. I wouldn't say they're quite an elite team, but they're definitely hanging in there. Last week was a fun one for the ACC. We had a couple good matchups there. Duke held on with Miami, obviously. The Louisville Clemson mess, and two more teams in our top 25 were Pittsburgh and SMU. I know I talked a little about Pittsburgh last time I was on the show a few weeks ago when they had to face North Carolina, and they handled them with ease. That was right after the James Madison beatdown. But how are you feeling about Pittsburgh?
So me and Ross went over this on Saturday. It was literally the first thing that we kind of talked about on the show was just how good do we think Pittsburgh is? Is Pittsburgh really good? Yeah, well, I think that Pitt like they normally are after what I've seen last week from them against SMU. SMU just seemed like a team on a different level. The score 48-25 does not do it justice to what the score was actually at. SMU destroyed them in every facet of the game, kind of bringing forth a little bit of argument that I kind of have against Notre Dame and where SMU is ranked as SMU being the first team out right now. But I'll get into that when we get down to them there, when we get into the meaty section of where the polls are at right now. But yeah, I honestly, after last week, I think I'm off of Pitt. I just think that this is typically what they do. They still have to play Virginia this week, which, they've been feisty. They're a tough team. They're not an easy walk-on win. They're not the best of teams. Should be a win for them, but they've been feisty. Then they got Clemson, which we know what they're capable of. Then they got Louisville at Louisville, and then Boston College. I don't think Pitt's going to be able to run through this because I just don't think that they can beat Clemson and Louisville on back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, that's a tough way to finish your schedule, especially when you're kind of sort of in the hunt, if you want to call it that.
It's all about momentum this time of year, too, how you're looking in November. and they decided to end. Well, was it? Yeah, it was already November. Then they decided to start November off with a complete dud when they were finally starting to get talked about. We talked about them here, and that was the first time I think that we talked about Pitt. We even posted about them on social media, so we were in and on them, and then instantly they come out and just have one of the more disappointing games of the weekend in terms of how they played, and especially it being a game that we kind of thought was going to be one of the better games of Saturday.
Pitt's been known to kind of hit that bump in the road, as you called it, and just deflate. Like your confidence is up here, and all it takes is a little bump in the road, and it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they can't bounce back this week against Virginia, there's no way they could handle Clemson. Louisville at home might as well be Clemson on the road, and Boston College, it's too late at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also just, you look at the teams that are ahead of them, and how many SEC teams there are that are ahead of them. It's going to be hard for you to find excuses to get some of these schools like Pitt in when there are 2-loss SEC schools out there. Because if you just look at the way that the rankings even shape up, I mean, right now you have at least 7. Am I counting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 teams in the top 16 from the SEC. So, Texas too. So 7. Yeah. See, I'm missing out on teams here. So it's 7 teams from the top 16 out of the SEC. Like, yeah, they play each other a little bit here and there, but for the most part, like 2-loss SEC teams are going to get the bump on a 2-loss ACC team.
Yeah, we all know there's not a single person, whether it's the AP poll or someone on the college ball playoff committee, that wants to see Pitt in there over, Mizzou, any lower half SEC team even.
You like this week we get Alabama, LSU this week. 2 teams that are both on the outside looking in, like right there. Alabama's actually in. They're at 11, and I honestly didn't expect to see that in the first polling, and there they are. Alabama, LSU is going to decide a lot, but LSU beats Alabama. Alabama has a 3-loss team, might get in over a 2-loss Big 12 team, ACC team, you name it, just because they're Alabama. And well, look at their body of work and look who they had to play, even if it is like they all play each other in the SEC. I don't know.
Well, that's where it gets fun, because obviously LSU wins, or Bama wins, they stay in. LSU wins, LSU is going to jump the line, and they're going to get in the 11th spot. But then, what does that mean for A&M? Because A&M beats LSU, then goes ahead and loses the next week. And this is what we talk about with the chaos, and every single angle you got to work it from, with strength of schedule and who lost to who. And, Northern losing to Buffalo the week after beating Notre Dame really fucked us for a little while. It's every little angle this can be looked at from is being looked at.
Yeah, and that's what's tough. Rounding it out really quick just to get more into it. Iowa State came in at 17, a team that just had another, disappointing loss. Ole Miss coming in at 16. Ole Miss plays Georgia this week. The 3 versus the 16 here. What happens if Ole Miss beats Georgia? What happens? Where does Georgia go from there? More chaos. You got Alabama versus LSU. Chaos waiting to happen there. Yeah, so this week already, you're going to start to see like how much relevancy matters, what they're taking in terms of the effect there. I mean, Texas A&M being on the outside looking in,
who still have to play Texas.
Yeah, they're still on. What happens with them being there at 14, LSU being there at 15, Alabama having the last spot. If Texas A&M controls the gauntlet, do they get in? Do they find a way to kick Notre Dame out just because of them not being in a conference? Like, this is all stuff that might actually happen, and it's going to be insane to see. But like a 3-loss team might get in, and they might get in over Notre Dame somehow. I don't know. It's just that's how it works in terms of the SEC.
Well, if Notre Dame doesn't win out, frankly, they kind of deserve to
Yeah.
not make it in, because those would be two pitiful losses. And apart from Bama and I think Ole Miss, nobody really has a loss quite up to Notre Dame's par this season.
So, no, Notre Dame has the worst loss in terms of any team that's in the top 25 right now. I mean,
Yeah, Bama lost to Vanderbilt for the first time probably ever, but it's still an SEC loss.
yeah, and I mean Vanderbilt arguably is ranked. They're ranked in the AP poll, so they're not ranked in the college football playoff, but Vanderbilt's still ranked in the AP. Our Army is actually 18 in the AP, so there's a big difference there in terms of what they're thinking for the college football playoff, and who they want these games.
You know how it works. It's who makes the money, who has the big NIL deals, who has a big name on their jersey.
Yeah. We'll just kind of have to see how the rest of it kind of plays out here, because like a Boise State loss and then that's all jumbled up into the next team up, which would, I guess, be Washington. I don't know.
I'm not sure what
Washington State or is it Army?
Would Washington State or Oregon State, should they have been competitive, would they be considered open to be?
I would think so. I would think so, but then again, like, I mean, Notre Dame is not considered any of that. I guess it's just because of the name of Notre Dame. So I don't know if there was certain rules. I know there were certain rules in place for Notre Dame, but like, I guess I don't know how they really think about that in terms of the college football playoff and those two teams, and it just being, I guess they're just a non-conference conference.
Whatever fancy lawyer mumbo jumbo they want to come up with.
Yeah, I honestly don't know what you consider them as. But
I think if they had to categorize it, they would probably just like rent them to the ACC like they've done in years past.
Yeah.
If it came down to that bottom line.
So this is where I kind of want to get into it now, because like we just talked about Notre Dame in terms of them having the worst loss out of any team that's out there in the top 25. What that really makes it come down to for me is like, you're looking at the first team being out right now as SMU, who just came off of dismantling of Pitt. They beat down a Pitt team that was undefeated up until last week. SMU has wins over Duke, who's been pretty good most of the season. I know that that was a close game, but Duke last week.
Duke also being one of Miami's best wins as well.
Yeah. And I mean, Miami handled them in the fourth quarter, but Duke had them early in that third quarter. Thought they might have competed a little bit more, but Miami just talent-wise became way too much for them.
Mm-hmm.
But they beat Louisville at Louisville. SMU did. Full destruction of FSU, dismantling of TCU. Their only loss of this season so far is to BYU, which BYU at that point was not ranked. They weren't thought to be where they are at this point. But they lost to BYU 18-15. Only loss on the schedule. Right now, they're the team on the outside looking out. BYU is the number 9 right now. You're going to put SMU, who, let's face it, looks like they've played a lot better of a schedule than Notre Dame has. And you're going to tell me that SMU is out over Notre Dame at this point? Like, what's the thought process there? What's the thought process there? So it's going to be interesting. Like, do they sit there and be like, wow, we kind of forgot about that ideal there. Now we have to put that into our thought process.
What I'm more worried about is LSU or Ole Miss or A&M, one of the teams on the outside looking in, getting in over SMU without a team in the top 12 falling out.
Yeah.
So if they just jump the line there, like obviously this week LSU is playing Bama. LSU wins, they'll go in, Bama comes out. That's whatever, it's a fair trade. But, LSU goes and beats the shit out of, I don't know, Citadel 56-0, and they for some reason wind up in the 13 spot. there will be Florida State-like problems with this ranking going forward, because this is a team who has showed out. Like you said, they're just dismantling teams. Their only loss was a quality loss to a team who is now, what'd you say, number 8, number 9 in the nation.
They're 9 and undefeated.
So that's what I'm really looking for, is one of these outside teams kind of getting that jump over them.
Yeah.
This is also SMU's first or second year in a power conference. Am I right or wrong about that?
Yeah, so they've actually kind of gone through a full retooling of their system. I don't know if you're familiar with the 30 for 30 they did on how SMU back in '83, I believe it was. They had a bunch of things that happened there that ended up not being legal in terms of the NCAA, and it tore the whole entire SMU football program down from front to back. They were a top tier dominant program in terms of what college football was at that point. And because of them doing the illegal things that they did, they ended up having to tear everything down. And then they have got themselves back up to a point now where they're playing football again. And it's a big portion due to boosters saying it's time for us to be an elite football program again. And now all of a sudden you're going to see SMU up there for the coming years, especially it being in a bigger conference. I believe last year they ended up was their first year kind of back in terms of competitiveness, but I don't remember if they were in a conference, what conference they were in, if they were in the Mountain West or.
Yeah, I thought that they had made the jump recently. I just wasn't sure. Where is SMU?
Texas.
Gotcha. Out of Texas. I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong, but just throw a dart. Was SMU also the baseball team from the 80s or 90s that was the only college team to ever get the NCAA death penalty? Did you ever read about that?
That's what they got, the death penalty in football. It might have been a full entire. Sports. It might have been their whole system shut down. I just remember the 30 for 30 being about the football program.
Yeah, I could have swore there was a death penalty for a baseball team, or I don't know why I thought it was SMU, but
they were doing good.
Somebody has to.
But yeah, just to kind of continue forward with it, SMU scheduled the rest of the year fairly easy. No offense to Boston College, Virginia, and Cal, but not the top teams in terms of what's out there in the ACC conference this year. They don't have to play Miami. They don't have to play Clemson. They played Louisville already. They don't have to play Syracuse. So that pick game was the big one for them. Of course, they have a bye week this week, so that's good for them so that they don't have the meltdown game. But you're telling me right now that they could finish the year with one loss. Pitt could finish the year with one loss. Miami could finish undefeated. SMU beats Miami in the ACC championship game. What happens then? SMU's in, Miami's out, Pitt's out.
I think Miami's in.
And then what do you do with Notre Dame at that point? That's what's going to get hard on Notre Dame here, is that there's too much of this ability for change in the conferences, especially this one at the SEC. The Big Ten, luckily a lot of teams are down this year, but I mean, Indiana's still going to be that team that we're looking at. They lose one game, they're out.
Is I maybe I'm crazy, but I think they are a legit powerhouse, and I think 8 is kind of silly. I think they're better than Tennessee. I think they're better than Penn State. But obviously, we'll get there as we work our way down.
I think it's hard to equivalate that, just because Indiana hasn't played anybody, man. They just they're handling their business, but
they're handling their business. They're winning on an average 3 scores a game. I mean,
But then you got an argument back the other way that's in favor of Notre Dame, because Notre Dame's handling their business against everyone they're playing. They're playing a tougher schedule than Indiana, and Notre Dame's top 20 in offense and defense since that NIU game.
yeah. I mean, Riley Leonard, I think his last 5 games, he's like PFF number 4 in the nation.
Yeah, Riley Leonard turned it around in a lot of ways.
But he really came along, and a lot of signs are going to point to kick Notre Dame out. And as much as everybody hates him, that brings it right back. It's the name on the jersey that's going to keep him right there as long as the NCAA could possibly stand it, or the committee, or whoever it may be.
Granted, I think we still got Indiana versus Ohio State coming up in a couple of weeks yet. That's gonna shake things up quite a bit.
Indiana loses by a field goal.
Yeah, you gotta kind of still give them credit. I mean, especially right now, like you got 4 of the top 8 teams being from the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean,
3 of the other ones are the SEC.
I think Penn State and Indiana are a route in for SMU, but that might only last until the conference championship. So it's as far as a route to getting SMU in there, it's very possible. And I think there are lanes in, but we're just going to have to wait and see on that one. There's so many moving pieces.
Yeah, I agree. It's honestly like I keep on coming up with more thoughts and processes than what I had earlier today, as I was kind of just going through it myself earlier, and now I'm just kind of like there's so much to evaluate right now that obviously it's going to become a little bit easier to break down, but then the conference championship is going to see how much that really plays in terms of leverage in terms of this all overall. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm struggling with what the thought process is in terms of some of these teams and what their one loss is, and like how they get to that one loss, how they looked recently. What are the main biases? Like it's a lot to kind of take in at this point. And it's just like I feel like even these top tier teams that are in the Big 12, it's like BYU. Well, BYU, I feel like, sorry, but you have to win your conference in order to be in still. You could have one loss and you're just not going to be in because of these other biases. And it's crazy to me. Like,
well, for BYU,
we're going to get from there.
They've got the Big 12, whoever locks it obviously has an in.
Yeah. But then all the other teams kind of are left on that downward slope, especially like
Iowa State, Colorado.
That's just like I don't know what they're going to end up doing with some of these schools and their main thought process in terms of what matters in terms of these schools and their big wins. Because when you look at like BYU plays Utah this week, that could be a big game for them, but Utah's failed to stay up to expectations. They got Kansas, they got Arizona State, they got Houston. Where's the loss?
Utah, I mean, they're currently obviously the whole Cam Rising situation's something, but I mean they've got to go 500 out to even make a bowl game this year. It's the routes for a few of these teams that are just real easy, and a few are real tough.
Yeah.
BYU, absolutely. Boise State, they're on the easier end of it. Like Indiana, like you mentioned, they're going to have a time. Texas with Texas A&M. Miami's probably going to have to play SMU. So
Boise State, it's always just looking, how many touchdowns do I want to bet Ashton Genty to get this?
Yeah. Money line. No, I'm cool. What was that stat I put in the group chat, or I texted you or something? Like a couple.
Yeah, it was like minus 4,500.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous. Even like first touchdown was like still minus 300.
Yeah, he was minus like 1,100 this past week.
It's crazy.
So I took him for 2 touchdowns this past week, and it was still like minus 200. I just added it to a parlay. We'll see. He's kind of hard to bet.
Yeah.
But yeah, Boise State, not a tough road ahead, but they don't have Colorado State, who's playing really good conference football so far this year. So Colorado State could be their conference championship, and that could determine quite a lot. But Boise State, once again, another team. Their only loss this year, 37-34 against number 1 Oregon. So there's hardly anything to argue about. I think Boise State right now is the clear lock to be that last spot, despite Army being undefeated. We'll see if there's a little bit of an argument in us in terms of what happens with Army-Navy game in a couple of weeks, because if Army beats Notre Dame, I think you got to sit there and start really talking about what do you do with that Army team if they stay undefeated. So I think
if Army beats Notre Dame, that's going to be a real head scratcher for the committee. Yeah. And they're already going to
chaos that I want, but it's the chaos that I'm here for still.
They're going to have a heart attack if they got to figure out how to keep Boise State, SMU, Indiana, Army. Well, you got to figure out how you can let them in and how you can't let them in. Alabama, though, already have 2 losses. They need to survive this weekend against LSU, and then it's pretty much a cakewalk. They play Mercer, I think. Oklahoma, I know it's a tough one. Oklahoma, and then somebody else. They finish at Auburn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, that was a 3. They finish at Auburn, so it's really just survival for them right now. You got to beat Brian Kelly this week. I don't know, where's the game at?
Oh, this week it's at LSU.
At LSU, so it's going to be a
wild crowd.
It's going to be a test. It's going to be hard to play in that environment.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, Brian Kelly in the big game that could pretty much decide if he wants to go to the college football playoff this year or not. Alabama also needing to win. That probably will decide if they go to the college football playoff or not. There probably is no tomorrow for the loser of this game. I kind of talked about it before, like what happens with a 3-loss Alabama team just because it's Alabama. Like anything is possible still because it's Alabama. Like Alabama might drop like 5 places and then they're just like, well, you get that weird loss where SMU loses and BYU loses and the whole Big 12 is a joke and only one of those teams gets in and the ACC only has 1 team in and anything like that, Alabama's going to find their way. But
with 3 losses, sure. LSU being 6-3 in the second week in November will not find their way.
Yeah, LSU won't. But Alabama probably won't. So we'll call it a must win. Winner's probably going to go to a college football playoff. Loser is not going to go to a college football playoff, depending on what happens during their last 3 weeks. I don't want Mercer to beat up on Alabama. That could happen. But
LSU does have to play Florida the following week, and we know they're not quite a powerhouse in the SEC anymore, but they've looked all right. They've looked like a pretty functioning squad.
See, and it depends on what games you get up for too. Some teams get up for certain games, and we'll see with that. But I mean, I honestly, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say Alabama gets it done. As Brian Kelly and LSU I'd probably bet them on the first half, and then the second half when the adjustments need to be made, just watch it fall apart.
Nothing I love seeing more than a red Brian Kelly on the sideline. I was watching a game with I was at my parents' house 2 or 3 weeks ago for a memorial dinner thing for my grandpa. We went to my parents' house after, and LSU was playing, and me and my dad were just talking shit to the TV. My mom's like, he gave you guys so many good years. Why you gotta be this nasty? And we're, me and him are just both like, what? No, fuck this guy. What are you talking about, Kim? Get out of here.
That's funny.
So into Notre Dame, we've mentioned them more than a few times now. Jason, what's up, buddy? Top 5. Are you talking about?
I think he's saying like when do you think they're locked in? None of the top 5. I think he just means in terms of if you're in the top 5. If you're in the top 5 going into the last week of the season, you're probably locked in. but it doesn't mean you're locked in this spot. No one's locked in any spot until after the conference championships games. That's going to jump up a lot of things. And also, you got to look at some of these matchups coming forward still. Like we already talked about 2 of the SEC games this week. We got SEC games next week. Georgia doesn't have it easy at all. Georgia gets Ole Miss. Then next week, Georgia gets Tennessee. It's not easy sledding here for Georgia by any means as well. They could have 2-3 losses, and you have to question where they're at. So I don't think any of these teams are going to be locked in anything. Probably locked into a playoff spot going into last week of the season if they only had 0 or 1 loss, but nothing in terms of solidifying those spots.
I'm confident enough to say I think Oregon is pretty locked.
Yeah, Oregon's in.
That's about the only team I'm going to go out there and publicly say Ohio State's probably fine. I know they have to play Indiana, and I know they have to play Michigan at the end of the year. I don't know the 2 games in between them. But, yeah, Georgia's got 2 tough games.
The SEC's tough in general with who they all have to play. I think a lot of the teams in the Big Ten, outside of that Indiana-Ohio State game, they all have it pretty easy in terms of who they got to play the rest of the year. But that's also just looking at the bottom half of the ranked teams out there. Like, there's no Big Ten teams out there anymore. Like, it's those top 4, and then it's just a graveyard of bad. So
I think Penn State's about as phony as it gets, to be completely honest.
But their schedule with who they have to play left, I mean, they get Washington. I think that might be their toughest game left on their schedule, honestly. Yeah. And that's Washington this week. They got Purdue, Minnesota, which Minnesota, that would be the toughest game I think they have left, and then Maryland. But
yeah, they got to play Maryland. But I mean, Minnesota is the weirdest bad team out there.
Are they really that bad?
Are they good?
No, but they're not bad. They're 4-2 in conference, 6-3 overall. Their losses were to Iowa and Michigan on back-to-back weeks, and they opened the season against North Carolina bad. But they won 4 straight. Iowa? They won 4 straight. They beat USC. They beat UCLA. They beat Maryland. They beat Illinois.
USC was that a top 10 ranked win? I know it was a ranked win.
USC was 11 at the time.
11.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, thanks for that one, Minnesota. Could have had another ranked game on my schedule.
So I think there's a good chance that Oregon and Ohio State decides the Big Ten championship. I have this idea in my head of what Ohio State versus Indiana looks like. And it looks like a game where it's all fun and Indiana's in there and the crowd's pumped up. And then the second half happens and Ohio State just steamrolls them into like, oh, this was the Indiana team we were all excited about for weeks, but then they finally had to play a real school.
Oh. That game's at the shoe too.
I do not recall.
Yeah, it is. That's not great. I mean, especially us talking, last year about James Madison so much and how sneaky they were and fun to watch. And you got Signetti coming over here and just 1 year completely rebuilding this program. I don't give a shit about your strength of schedule. You're 8-0. I mean, 9-0. You have a couple okay wins. You beat the shit out of Dylan Raiola in Nebraska. You got, 23 scholarship players came over with him. They're up there with Northern as one of the oldest and most experienced teams out there. So it's been a fun ride. Did they beat Ohio State? Probably not. Awesome to watch, though. Signetti's super fun. Seems like a great coach.
Hey, I'll be cheering for Indiana. I just
don't get me wrong. I'm not rooting against them. I'm just using my brain here.
Yeah. No, when that game's on, I'll probably make that appointment television for myself to watch it and then be like, yeah, didn't I say this a couple weeks ago? Frick, I might say it on another show before that game.
No, Bailey, we're not going to the mall so Jackson can sit on Santa's lap. We're watching Indiana, Ohio State.
I'll take Jackson to see Santa. I want to see Santa.
Okay, so back where we were before we got all kind of clusterfucked around there. Notre Dame, we spent quite a bit of time talking about. That's way too many variables to even get into unless you've got a wide open night ahead of you.
Yeah,
BYU, we touched on a bit.
Blowing teams out. That's all they gotta do. Keep blowing everybody out.
Yeah, you need quality blowouts for Virginia, Florida State.
Don't let Florida State be stupid and hang around. It's nighttime. It's Notre Dame. Just go out there and beat the living crap out of them. Make it 28-0 by halftime, and then when it comes to the end of the second half, 3 points is allowed. 52-3. Walk the hell out of Notre Dame Stadium feeling happy.
I'll take it. BYU, Big 12, kind of a mess. Indiana, we spoke on, and then we have Tennessee in the 7. You did mention they have to play Georgia the week after next.
Yeah, so Georgia gets the fun of playing Ole Miss this week in a tough game, and then they get to play Tennessee next week. That game will be at Georgia, though. And then Tennessee has their easy scheduled game that the SEC for some reason does in playing Texas El Paso, and then they got Vanderbilt at Vanderbilt, which is another tough game.
That's a sneaky game.
And it's an in-state rivalry. This is the first time that Vanderbilt fans want to carry another goalpost down. So that's going to be a fun game to watch there in the last week of the season. But Georgia, that's going to be a tough game. But it could also be a game that decides if they're going to stick around in terms of the playoff. I could see them losing to Georgia and Vanderbilt, and then we're not talking about them at all.
Yeah, no, and knocking one of them SEC teams out of there is always a nice thing to see at the end of the year. We've talked about years before this was even a show how bored we were of seeing the same 4 teams in the playoff every year. Yeah. And obviously we're mixing it up here, but to have Miami, who I'm not huge on, whatever. But if SMU could sneak in BYU and Indiana, Oregon is coming back from, obviously they've been solid the last few years, but we haven't seen a team this dominant since the Chip Kelly, Marcus Mariota, 11, 12 years ago, the BCS back-to-back losers. So it's a lot of fun. I like seeing the other teams in there. So I think we could count on Tennessee losing at least one of those games. I wouldn't want to go into Georgia at night personally.
I don't want to go to Georgia at all.
Want to play Augusta?
All right, I'm in.
Get fucking smoked.
Yeah, well,
It's like putting on class. 12-team college football playoff is a blessing. I agree with you, Jay.
I think we're going to kind of have to just see how Tennessee kind of rolls out here these next couple of weeks. I mean, but I really don't have a major opinion on this team just because they've been so inconsistent on offense. Everyone was highlighting how explosive they'd be, and now it's just kind of they're a 7 seed, but they're also bland and they're not bland, and I don't know how I feel about Tennessee whatsoever. I think Georgia's going to decide a lot on if I think they'll be a fun team to watch in the college football playoff or not.
Yeah. Kind of straying off topic just a touch, but because we brought up Vanderbilt, I just want to give them a quick round of applause. They're already bowl eligible in the first week of November. How fantastic is that?
Yeah, absolutely. We were all on the hype train with some of their earlier stuff they were doing.
Even their first couple, I don't remember how the beginning of their season went, but I vividly remember speaking about how it was such a great game, or it was, such a quality loss, or they held on to this great team until the end there.
Yeah.
And do they even have a working scoreboard yet, or is it still hung by a crane?
I think it works. Okay. I'll have to get back to you on that.
But I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's nice to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Watching just the SEC punching bag just rolling over and not taking the punches anymore, getting back up and fighting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Vanderbilt's been kind of one of the teams that has created so much of the chaos that we've already seen. And with a month left, we know we're in for more. And this is also a time where I think we kind of sit down a lot more and start to enjoy all of the games instead of just a few, which makes it, when Notre Dame has these games against Florida State, all
It's a
right,
little easier to change the channel rather
yeah,
than, the first 6 games or first 8 games compared to the last 6 or 4.
exactly. And it's kind of good to kind of get an idea of where everybody's at. I think this is also kind of one of those years too where there wasn't instantly there was the Carson Becks and everything and whatnot in terms of who we thought were going to be the best players out there, but some
Right.
revelations in terms of who the best players really have been and names that you might not have expected or heard of before. Ashton Genty. Um,
I'll
so
raise my hand. I have no idea who he was prior to week 1 of this college football year.
I didn't even know him in week 1, but
Fair enough. No, I mean that's you're right on there with that. Somebody, I forget who I was talking to, made a Carson Beck, Patrick Mahomes kind of comparison with who we thought was the clear number one quarterback, and here we are, 7, 8, 9 weeks later, and he's got just as many interceptions as touchdowns, and it's a little ugly of a year. But I mean, you ask 100 people, and 90 of them prior to week 1 are going to say Carson Beck's the best quarterback in college football.
yeah. Uh, you might get some Shadur Sanders out there, but
Some Quinn Ewers, maybe
Jackson Dart. That was
Jackson
my
Dart, Dylan
That was
Gabriel.
my guy at the beginning of the season. I was all about Jackson Dart and Ole Miss. So here's a chance
Awesome.
for them to prove themselves. But
My
just to jump,
dumbass was still on the Brady Cook train. So
yikes. All right. Well, we got the top 6 here. Penn State, we've kind of already talked about them quite a little bit. We saw what happened last week against Ohio State. They didn't have one offensive touchdown in that game. They had 2 chances where they had the ball within the 5 on a 1st and goal. And just honestly, I'm sitting there like, I like Nicholas Singleton a lot. I put him in a lot of my touchdown parlays for my Saturdays, and I've been hitting at a pretty good rate on that. I'd say it's one of the only things I'm actually hitting on nowadays. And they're not even using him in the red zone. Not even using him. Just like nothing made sense to me about it. Um,
do you think obviously coaches are going to be held to the highest standards in college football? Do you think a game like that and Franklin's going into that stadium, or I'm sorry, at his own stadium, kind of like messed up in the head a little bit, like trying to flip plays and, turn the page in the playbook 3 times, and he's just kind of getting in his own head? Because the play call, I mean, I don't know if he calls his own plays. It was abysmal. I mean, you got the defensive touchdown, that first drive field goal. You forced a fumble on like the 2, gave you a touchback and the ball to 25. You had no reason, and you go 0 for 2 in the red zone. You had no reason to not win that game. They kept it close, which was surprising enough. But I mean, how do you look back?
James Franklin is literally like Brian Kelly's like younger stepchild. Like literally, he's the same exact coach. He can't win the big game. He miscoaches these big games. He's lost 8 in a row to Ohio State now.
Yeah.
All these years, I mean, there's pretty much every year Penn State has been ranked in these situations. Probably been top 10 in a lot of these situations, and you never pull any of them out ever. During the Ryan Day era too. Like, I understand Urban Meyer. I understand those teams. Ryan Day's teams have not been these top tier juggernauts. Like, Michigan's been the team to beat in that conference for the last few years.
Yeah.
You should have at least beaten Ohio State once by now. And just for that, I really hope Penn State loses more football games. Like,
that's what I'm saying. I don't want to see them in the playoff. I don't want a TCU 63-0 game.
If it ends up being Penn State, then I hope Notre Dame's the team that gets them.
As of right now, the way it's lining up, I love it.
Yeah, I would take that. What I really want to happen is I want Notre Dame to have a home game so I could get tickets for the first college football playoff game at Notre Dame and go get my free rooms at the Four Winds and just enjoy it.
In a perfect world, Bruno.
Yeah, well, But if Notre Dame's in and I have to accept them being in just to have a road game, give me Penn State, please. Please give me Penn State.
Yeah. I mean, that defense, it's fantastic. Ohio State figured it out, but they just don't move the ball.
Penn
I mean,
State's gonna like we said it. Penn
yeah,
State's gonna lose to Minnesota in a couple weeks. I'm putting it out there.
I don't understand the hype behind Drew Aller. I don't get it. He was like 4 for 9 with like 40 something yards with like 2 minutes left in the first half. Then he got a big chunk play, which obviously looked bad still because you're still under 100 yards and a half with 10 attempts, roughly 50%. Like, look at the numbers. They're right in front of you.
Yeah.
I don't get the hype. I think, and I said it last week, if that was a night game and there was a whiteout, I think Penn State was a lock. After watching them play Ohio State for their, big, tough matchup, this team just sucks, man. They're bad. I want to see them get tossed. I hope they lose to Minnesota at Minnesota.
It's funny because Ross, a couple of weeks ago on the show was just like basically stating how bad Penn State is and like who's the worst undefeated team and why is it Penn State? And now you're kind of just like saying the same things.
The last time Ross and I were on the show, when it was just the two of us, maybe a month ago or so, we were talking a fair amount of shit about Drew Aller. I don't remember who they were playing, but obviously it was a big enough game to have us mention him. And we're like, well, it all comes down to the guy who can't, that lives and dies by high percentage passes.
Yeah.
Like there's no downfield. Every chunk play is a receiver screen or a running back screen or just a rush. I don't know. I'm getting all worked up.
Yeah,
7-6 though. 7-6, bounce them. I'd rather see SMU in there.
Yeah, I agree with those sentiments. Number 5, we got Texas here. Got Florida coming up this weekend. Got Arkansas, got Kentucky, and then at Texas A&M. I think Texas is going to be a team that's pretty close to a lock for this right now, even at number 5. I think if they win the next 3 games, even if they lose at Texas A&M, they're in. But I don't really see them losing either. I just don't. Texas A&M is going to be tough, but I don't see them losing.
So if you have to bench Ewers again, is that it?
Well, I would think so. I would think you got to be. And I mean, that's the one thing that I think we talked about before the season started was that quarterback roulette might be the downfall of Texas.
I mean, Quinn Ewers is a phenomenal athlete, good quarterback. Obvious. I mean, maybe it's not obvious, but you've got to imagine there's some self-esteem or confidence issues going on there, having a Manning in the locker room with you. The kid lights it up when you're out for a couple weeks with injury. You're having a rough game, nothing to get you pulled for the season, but your team needs a spark, so he goes in for you, tears shit up. It's got to be incredibly tough, especially playing as a junior, or I think a junior. He might have redshirted at Ohio State. But, in a potential draft year, when Manning's wanting that starting spot next year, that's got to be tough. So he needs to ball out. They need to lock in their 5 spot or wherever they may land, and he needs to have a good playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about Quinn Ewers, the NFL prospect, just in terms of the mentality of like what a Manning in the locker room is, though. Like, couldn't agree more. Like, there's going to be a lot of pressure. And if Arch isn't the starter next year, Arch isn't going to stay at Texas. So it's just it's just one of those things where it's like, they want to sit there and change the guard in terms of possibly benefiting the future. But right now, you got a shot at winning a national championship. I would try not to put any distractions in terms of your locker room, your quarterback play, or anything like that by changing this up now. So I think I think it's Quinn Ewers' team unless they lose a game in these next 3 weeks. But I think Quinn Ewers takes the team next A&M. So
Um, Looking at Miami in the 4, I've kind of said it out loud. I don't like them. I think they're kind of on the same train as Penn State. I don't think they're a legit superstar. They've had a very soft schedule. Their quality wins are Duke, and they had one more not so interesting game. I just can't remember.
They beat Louisville at Louisville, but it was 52-45. There was no defense. This week they won 53-31. It's just Miami is going to give up points. It's just a matter of how much Cam Ward continues to score with them. But if they end up playing a team that's ready to play defense, maybe even like a cold weather game, which I don't think they're going to get, but they're getting their toughest game right now. I mean, they got Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. Is there a tough game in there? Is Syracuse tough anymore?
I mean, Georgia Tech's okay. They're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're 5-4. They're fine. I like them as kind of a dark horse, not to do what exactly Indiana's doing, but we kind of thought they'd be on the same path this year. Indiana's just moving a lot quicker. But I was listening to the Pat McAfee show or something, and Saban actually picked them in the beginning of the year as one of their like out of left field teams, kind of making a comeback to greatness when they, 15 years ago when they had a really solid squad.
Mm-hmm.
But Syracuse, Kyle McCord was doing real well there, and then they just kind of hit a wall. Kyle McCord doing Kyle McCord shit.
Yeah, that pick game was really ugly for them. So, but yeah, Syracuse is. I mean, they do compete still. They're not the worst team, but that's probably their toughest game left on their schedule. I don't see Miami losing unless they get SMU here in the championship game, which I think is very likely. And I think I would give the edge to SMU in that one just because of what I have seen SMU do so far and what I think their abilities are. I mean, hell, Kel is freaking 0-4 in conference. And Miami beat Cal 39-38. They beat Virginia Tech 38-34.
That's what I'm looking at right now. The middle of the season, weeks 5, 6, they're winning these one-score games against teams that are not, on the same ranked level as they are.
Yeah.
These teams are nowhere near the top 25, let alone a top 5.
Yeah. So I'm not the biggest fan of Miami either. I think Miami's going to Miami, but it might not come against the schedule that they have on paper right now.
I mean, Duke held them to what was it, 3 quarters last week till they kind of really ran away with it.
Yeah, and it got ugly, which was what Miami needed to have happen there. But for a second there, like Duke took that lead before they went on the big run at the end of the game, and I thought, okay, we might be in for something. And then I cut the TV on it and shouldn't have cut the TV on it.
Yeah, I remember I was watching once that Ohio State Penn State game ended. I was watching both Illinois and Miami, kind of watching the upset alerts, and the upsets did not go in the direction I wanted them to go. I wanted Illinois to pull it out and Miami to fall apart, but
yeah.
Georgia's going to Georgia at number 3. You've brought up their schedule a couple times now. They have Ole Miss next week and then Tennessee, right?
Yeah, and then they got UMass and Georgia Tech, so they're done with their SEC
2-7 and 5-4.
Yeah, so I think Georgia is. It's going to be tough. I mean, Georgia hasn't been that crazy great in terms of their games. They've been close. These games can swing either way. This week, I mean, at Ole Miss, I think this is going to be a very interesting one. I think that they'll handle Tennessee at home, but I kind of think Ole Miss is the tougher game at this point, just because it is at Ole Miss, and I gotta support the boy Jackson Dart. So
let me ask you: we're talking about they're looking at how to get into the college football playoff from every little angle.
Mm-hmm.
The Georgia's, Texas's one loss came from Georgia with that. It was a terrible call, and then what's his name cried about it enough. Sarkisian had some words after the game. There was it easily could have gone the other way, and Georgia's a 2-loss team right now. Do you think there are guys on that committee saying, fuck that, they have 2 losses? If they win another one, they're not dropping from, or if they lose another one, they're not dropping from 3 to 9, they're dropping from 3 to out of the playoff?
I don't think that's something that they would even consider. It's Georgia. Georgia's going to have that bias no matter what. And even if they aren't the best team to watch with your eyes, in terms of what kind of money Georgia brings in terms of a playoff and all those things, a 2-loss Georgia team's not going to be out of this playoff. There's no way that they are not going to get like a Florida State treatment. They would much rather keep they would much rather keep a 1-loss Notre Dame team out, a 1-loss SMU team out. Even though I think Notre Dame probably brings in the best ratings out of any team in the playoff, but I think just based off of where ESPN makes their money and shit like that, it's just Georgia's in.
All right. Same question, but they're a less important school. They're Tennessee. Do you think then they might look into it a little bit? Or do you think that's kind of blown over? The record is what the record is.
Tennessee is the same way. It's an SEC school. I mean, Tennessee, 2 losses, they're in. It's just they ain't gonna do anything to these 2-loss SEC schools that are already in, and most of them are going to end up with 3 losses, and that's what we're going to hold on to keep teams out. And that might become the precedent in terms of like the SMUs and the BYUs and the Notre Dames who either don't win their conference or don't have a conference. They're going to have 1 loss, and they just can't have 3 losses. They can't have 2 losses because the 3-loss SEC schools might matter more. And that's what I think it's going to end up being when it all comes said and done is only have 1 loss if you're not in the SEC or the Big Ten.
Moving on. Big Ten to round us off. Ohio State in the 2 spot and Oregon in the 1 spot. So Oregon is the clear number 1. I don't think anybody could argue that. And if you wanted to argue it, nobody's going to listen.
Yeah.
Oregon's no slouch, though. Oregon's lost. Yeah.
Ohio State is, they probably should have lost last week. They're not going to lose to Purdue. I don't think they lose at Wrigley Field against Northwestern.
I would be amazed to see that.
That would be fun. That would be a lot of fun, honestly. Indiana.
Indiana's interesting, but it's at the shoe, and that's going to be a lot of lights, camera, and action for Signetti and the boys there. And then obviously, I mean, if they lose to Michigan, that would just be poetic justice, but I don't see that happening.
Oh, God. It'd be awesome if they lost to Michigan.
The first time you could record me saying I want Michigan to win a game. But no, I mean, they're no slouch, obviously. Jeremiah Smith, Will Howard, they have a good team. What's that guy's name? He went to Marist, and then he went to that school in Florida, Tate something. They've got them. They've got the receivers. They've got Judkins. They've got the other guy too. I forget his name. And then they've got the backfield, or I'm sorry, the secondary. They basically just stole from Alabama when Saban retired. They are not a joke. They are a solid squad. Some scary Carnell Tate. Thank you. Some scary moments, though. I mean, like that Nebraska game was in it. Penn State was in it way longer than they should have been. They're not having these blowout games. I know you kind of mentioned that this Ryan Day squad is not an Urban Meyer squad. But this team, this talent, are they being miscoached? I mean, Chip Kelly looks like he's calling good offense.
I think that's a lot of Ohio State of late. Ohio State's just miscoached because they have the talent every year to be the best team.
Chip Kelly, I think, is living and dying by establishing the run when you have the best receiving trio in the nation and it's not close.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you.
But I think, I don't know, to round it off, I think it's a fine list once you get to to the top 12. I think it's going to move around. I think it needs to move around.
And I mean, like, you also have to take into account here, like, BYU is technically the 4th spot despite being ranked 9th right now, just because of winning.
They're gonna get their bye.
So,
Everyone will
Ohio State's playing Boise State right now in a college football bowl game. Notre Dame's getting Penn State. That's what it would be right now. So kind of have to see how they jumble up their rankings in terms of that as well, of where you may fall in. I do kind of like the idea of the 6 versus 11 matchup of Texas versus Alabama right now, though. So
that would be interesting. Do you think Alabama has the players who want to go out and play for this coach in a playoff setting, or are they kind of playing for themselves? I know there was talk about around midseason that the locker room was kind of a free for all.
I think we could see that this week. I mean, how do they come into Baton Rouge? Like, if you come into Baton Rouge and a Brian Kelly team beats you by like double digits,
it's over.
You know that this team didn't want to play for him anymore because it's a Brian Kelly team. They don't do that. Like, I'm sorry, they don't. It's just a big game, big setting. They don't do that. They might win it, but they don't beat teams like that. So I think we could kind of have an idea of that after this week. And I think we think that we're going to have an idea of stuff after every week, and we're not going to have an idea what they're going to do until the last week of the season. Like, it's the same things that were considered last year, injuries, going to take a major effect of this at the end of the season.
Yeah, and that's another thing about this too that a lot of people don't think about. What they see is, more football, longer season, more playtime. I mean, the week 1 to week, 18 now, or 14 plus, your 3 rounds, 17 weeks with a few buys.
You got to earn the extra games, though.
That's no joke.
You just got to earn the extra games.
Those 1, 2, 3 extra games you're going to be playing, that's a lot of wear and tear. Even, I don't care if you're 19 or 40, that's a lot on the body.
I don't feel bad. They're making money now.
I don't feel bad for them personally.
I'm
just saying, you can't expect the same explosiveness out of these guys.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you're literally talking about like the growing from a 13-14 game season to going to a 16-17 game season, but there's like 5 bye weeks bought in between all of it, and like
sure.
But
I mean, we're like still 20th. They're still in pads, from what, April until January now.
I don't think we're going to see a decline in terms of explosiveness. That would be anything that we could.
Okay. But
longer season plus schooling equal mental exhaustion. Damn, you guys.
It's a good excuse. I should have used that.
Well, I am sitting here kind of paying attention on the side right now because action's going on. Northern Illinois is playing right now. Nothing like a little Wednesday football. So we got football. We got Notre Dame basketball up by 20 right now. Got the Bulls, got the Blackhawks, got a fun little Wednesday night. Prepping us in for the big weekend here. We'll see. We'll see what happens with the college football playoff after this week. And I mean, the main eyes are going to be on the SEC. I think this weekend might be on the SEC again next weekend. The only thing that really we could all kind of hope for is these bigger name teams to kind of, some of them get beat. And make it more fun for us to talk about it.
Bruno, you got anything else?
No. I know that Ross is really busy this week, so I don't know if we'll be back on Saturday morning, but I'd like to try and keep doing little college football playoff shows throughout the rest of the year like this, from however we could do it. I'm off work this week, so it kind of just played out well. Hopefully Ross's schedule works out and Ross and Chris can maybe do some shows, and then we'll get some more shows on Saturdays as Chris is starting to come into a Monday schedule. So we'll get all three of us on here shortly, but we'll be back and we'll make sure to keep on doing these as new polls are released and try to give you the previews of the week ahead. But other than that, it was nice getting on a Wednesday with you, Chris.
Yeah, man, it feels like last season all over again. Just kind of listen to my kids cry downstairs and my wife handle it while we're doing our thing.
I think this is the longest episode we've had too. Normally we've been perfectly at an hour and 15 minutes just talking about this. And honestly, if Ross was able to jump on today, I'm sure it would have been an hour and 45 minutes because
Just
we got no opinions. So we'll continue to play along here and enjoy your week, everybody.
Yeah, enjoy it. Have a good week.